Wander versus Quadratus, Angered Beach Elephant. Okay, so Quadratus, being a boss fight that introduces yet another combat mechanic, faces the same burden that Valus was put under. But in this case, Valus was holding up 3 times the weight like Atlas, while Quadratus was holding up its burden like Achilles being kicked in the shins, and lets the player down pathetically. There could be different reasons for this happening. The fact that Quadratus moves with all the speed of a 4x4, hauling a trailer full of grandfather clocks up a sand dune that allows for easy strafing around the gargantuan elephant while wanders on foot, trying to get a bead on its weak point. Honestly though, the weak point that the developers of Quadratus went for was sticking it on the bottom of its feet. The only reason that I can think of for this weak point being put in such a stupid place on the monster was because it was one of the only things that could have been related to Quadratus' only attack. The stomp that requires Quadratus to slowly raise up his body like his legs are powered by hydraulics and then crashing it to the ground, crushing whatever's in front of him. And the attack is so goddamn slow that you could suffer a major brain freeze during the fight and still have time to dodge the attack before it hits the dirt. And even then, the attack will only hit anything that's in front of him, so again, having a thinking brain is the perfect counter for this fight, and makes everyone who fights it look like an idiot. And adds to the completely pathetic nature of this boss fight. Oh, and let's not forget that when you finally do manage to shoot it in its weak spot and climb onto its leg, that the movement physics are a fresh hell with fuzzy dice. The physics that are so utterly putrid, it leaves the player with a 50-50 chance of being able to move, or spending the entire time on Quadratus falling down with the regularity of a ticking clock. And most crushingly of all, the reason that Quadratus was just too easy to beat. Combining 15-second telegraphed attacks, the speed of a glacier, and the wonky physics leaves Quadratus as an overall annoyance to fight rather than being an actual threat on the battlefield. Whether or not these things are true, the sad truth might be that Quadratus was just set up to fail by its design team. Quadratus is a classic case of tutorial boss syndrome. A boss fight that requires the scaling down of difficulty in order to introduce a brand new mechanic to the player. However, while Valus perfected the tutorial, Quadratus has to introduce the bow mechanic, which is the only way to beat this boss. And the bow is just badly designed. With the absence of a lock-on mechanic besides the general camera button that just keeps the boss in view, that doesn't lock onto weak spots, and any sort of aiming ability, the player just has to guesstimate trajectory and throw the shot. And yes, this is more realistic than the bow having a laser-guided accuracy system. This wasn't the place to do this, and ultimately all shots are being fired are completely up to the machinations of fate whether or not they actually hit the target. While speaking this review, I honestly couldn't think of a comparative boss fight that mainly used bows to win. I could think of fights that use bows with lock-on mechanics in order to win, but that's not the same brevity as the Quadratus fight. I thought of some sniper boss fights, but again, there's a huge difference between laser pointer bullet machines and a lifelike bow mechanic in video games. I couldn't decide to call Quadratus a good or bad boss fight, sitting on the fence on this issue like the world's easiest to spot spy. And it almost ended the same way, getting a rock tossed on my metaphorical head and landing on its side face down and unconscious. Okay, not entirely the same. So Quadratus didn't have a lot going in its favor, being clunky, wonky, annoying, but let's see what the scoreboard has to say about our elephantine buddy. Gameplay. A mediocre shooting mechanic held up by a near inability to defend, and ultimately a bad design. 3 2/3 Triforces. Story. Actually, the bad design choices fit well for the story, being a helpless being manhandled by Wander. I'll give it some credit. 6 Triforces. Fun. I can respect a boss for not having easy to hit weak spots, but having them on the soles of the feet isn't a better solution. Bad movement physics that kept the player falling down half the time and relying on a bow with no aim. This boss was ultimately an annoyance, which I can only give functionality points. 3 1/3 Triforces. Which leaves Quadratus, Angered Beach Elephant, with a disappointing final score of 13 out of 30. While I could be sympathetic towards it for the bad bow mechanic ultimately not being its fault, the other aspects of this fight, slowness, no threat, bad weak point placement, and movement physics, can only lend itself to the story aspect. Another Colossus down leaves 14 more to go. Stay tuned, guys, and as always, I'll leave you with this. Victory for gamers.